For being here. I'll call the meeting to order. Call the roll. Councilmember Du Bois.
Here.
Vice Mayor Niss. Here. Councilmember Koo. Here. Chair Wolbach.
Here.
4 present.
All right. First item is, before action items, oral communications. We have one speaker, Jennifer Landsman.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello? I don't know if this is working. It's working. Okay.
We can
Thank
hear
you. Happy Hanukkah. I am here tonight. First, I understand that staff is going to be running a meeting on jet noise, and this is more about your agenda for the early part of the year. It's very good, but I'm concerned about enough time from council and enough time from you to address this issue that is very dynamic and a lot of things are happening. So because of that timing, I want to make sure everything's covered and you get this information. I'm here to ask you to please add to your agenda for your first meeting of the year, the item for jet noise, and as regards legal conversations about this topic. And the second reason I'm here is to ask you to please commission a legal analysis of airspace procedures which impact the city of Palo Alto, to document briefly history before NextGen, with NextGen, the status of environmental reviews, current status of the administrative record of the federal agency, review where and how cumulative impacts are being considered, and very importantly, consider new information that we have obtained in the last 6 months. I'll give you an example. Bodega, which is the northern arrivals, is a very big route that impacts the city. And there has been a shift from the eastern leg to the western leg. That, for example, was not comprised in the environmental review done in 2014 because that decision had to do with something else related to the Asiana accident. So when it's not part of the review, it means it's still required to have a review because the impacts are major. So a legal analysis conducted by an attorney would be able to point that out to you so that when you're asked how you feel about laws being observed in this process, you would be able to answer. So I've brought 4 documents for your consideration. One is a sample of what an investigation of procedures done by a law firm is done when City Attorney Molly Stump hosted a meeting with the attorney, an aviation attorney. He taught us about the importance of environmental reviews. It's the only way we can address impacts and mitigations. So this is a sample. It could be done for each of the 3 routes that impact Palo Alto. The other one is an example of an inquiry into an EA that was never done in the mid-2000s. I strongly encourage you to do some holiday reading with this, but really it should be the attorney that does that so that he can write a report. Another example of when an environmental review was not done. And lastly, open questions from a citizen in Palo Alto. You may know Professor Robert Finn. He attended the meeting with the city attorney and the aviation attorney recently, and he had some really, really great questions, and I think they reflect what a lot of Palo Alto citizens are wondering about. So thank you very much, and I've sent a cover to that as well. Have a very happy holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our first action item. Review and recommendation to the City Council of an ordinance amending section 4.42.190 taximeters. And also, actually, I'm not going to read all the numbers, but schedule of rates and display. Also, business and license regulations of the Palo Alto Municipal Code to allow taxi cab service to be pre-arranged by a mobile device application and internet online service. And staff, do you want to make a presentation?
Introduce the Deputy Director of Technical Services. Is that right, Charlie?
Yes, it's a mouthful, but for the
Yeah.
police department.
Charlie Cullen.
Thank you, Rob. Distinguished council members, the intention of this revision to the Muni Code is to level the playing field for the cab companies. We regulate the cab companies that operate here in Palo Alto, and we've had a number of requests over the years with the emergence of Lyft and Uber that are not regulated by the city and are regulated by the CPUC to change the way that the cabs do business and allow them to offer an online service with a preset fare. And after considerable discussion with the city attorney's office, we came up with some minor revisions to the existing ordinance. There is legislation statewide legislation that was signed by Governor Brown that goes into effect in January of 2019 that will require cooperation and within all the county municipalities to come up with a policy, a consistent policy. But in the interim for this year, at least this will allow the taxi cabs to have an online app where people can order a cab similar to how they use Uber or Lyft. It levels the playing field, and it I think it allows for a more competitive environment for the citizens of Palo Alto who want a cab.
Did you say what the app is going to be called?
We don't know what the app is going to be called.
It'll have something though that's similar to Lyft or.
Right, and be something you download onto your phone, and you can order a cab just like you do a Lyft or an Uber vehicle. This is our Heather Johnson has done a great deal of work with the taxi cab company. She does the permitting. She actually does the inspections of the taxi cabs and is very familiar with what other municipalities have done here, both in Santa Clara County and in San Mateo County, and what some of the pending legislation is. So if you have any questions, she knows the minutia of the taxi cab rules here in Santa Clara County.
Did you want to add anything before we go to council member questions or comments?
I don't have anything to add.
All right, I'll turn to colleagues for questions, comments, and motions. Tom, you raised your hand first.
I mean, the ordinance looks pretty straightforward. I'm just curious, so this is for taxi cab companies. Are Uber and Lyft regulated under these ordinances, or?
They're regulated by the CPUC.
So municipalities do not have any authority over Uber or Lyft because they are considered an internet company and are similar to limousines. They are only regulated by the CPUC. We do not have the authority to regulate them.
So if a taxi company mostly use this app, would they become not regulated by the cities anymore?
No, they still fall under the regulations that the taxi, because they operate as a taxi cab, they have a meter in their vehicle, et cetera. So they would still require a permit from us to operate in the city of Palo Alto. It just allows them to add an app feature that they didn't have in the past and provide a preset fare, correct?
Correct.
Similar to when you ask for Uber, they tell you how much it's going to cost you before you get in the vehicle.
Okay.
So there's still rates that have to be posted on the taxis for any hailed taxis or someone who's called, but this way, there's an opportunity if the demand is low for them to use an app and actually charge less. So anyone who uses the app to hail a taxi will never pay more, will actually usually pay less, depending on demand.
And some of the advantages that taxi cabs have that you don't get with Uber and Lyft is they do have requirements to have a certain amount of cabs that are handicapped equipped. There are some people, believe it or not, who don't use the internet and still call cabs on the phone. So having that service provides something that you don't necessarily get because they are regulated.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the changes to the ordinance looked very
minor.
simple. Yeah, so thanks for bringing it to us.
Lydia, go ahead.
So just continuing with Tom's question about Uber and Lyft not being regulated, is taxi cabs regulated by the CPUC?
No, they're regulated by individual cities
Individual
that
cities.
choose to regulate. Not every single city chooses to regulate. Like in Santa Clara County, as far as
Right.
the northern part of the county, only Santa Clara, San Jose, Sunnyvale, and Palo Alto. Mountain View has an ordinance, but it's really just a business permit that is operated through the finance department.
I see.
So it's up to the individual city whether or not.
And so Uber and Lyft has the carpool, right? They do carpooling also. Would taxi cab be allowed to? I noticed in the staff report, it says that their little thing in their meter, when somebody's in there, it cannot be up. But would there be an app that would allow them to also do ride share? I mean, ride share is different from carpool, right?
Correct, yeah, no, I
just wanna-
understand what you're asking, yes. So
Yeah.
no, they would not be allowed to pick up more than one passenger at a time.
Okay. They get tips, right?
They
Is
can
it-
accept
Is it
tips.
handled the same way on the internet as the Uber and Lyft is handled? How does
I
Uber and
would-
Lyft handle tips?
You know, I think there's an option on
Yeah.
the application itself that you can add a tip to the fare if you want to.
Okay.
How they develop their app, we're not sure if they would have
Yeah.
that feature as part of it. I assume they would, since they do rely on tips.
And Santa Clara and San Jose have been allowing them to use their app for, depending, San Jose since 2015 and Santa Clara since 2016, and both of them have been happy with it. They've not had any challenges with it. I don't know in regards to the tipping, but I would assume.
Okay. Okay, and then I think I have something here, just a minute, because I think Tom just asked this. Okay, yeah, I guess you've answered everything that I have here, and it looks pretty straightforward and will be more fair, right?
We think so. but-
Yeah, I don't see any disadvantage.
Even with how they drive on the road and when they park to pick up people, that's all regulated by the police department also, right? Is,
Yes, they need to obey
Yeah.
the regulations, and
Legal.
we have set up a cab stand here by Litton Plaza on
Mm-hmm.
the weekend nights, which has worked fairly well for people coming out of the bars and restaurants.
So they're just required to legally park. We all know that they don't, but that is the regulation.
So are Lyft and
So,
Uber, although.
yes.
yeah,
So-
Uber, I mean, I'm noticing
Yes.
more and more
Yes.
Uber and Lyft just kind of pulling, and sometimes the back end is sticking out on the road, so it causes some traffic issues also. I haven't seen so many taxis doing it anymore. You know, it's more the Lyft and Ubers. But it is, taxis would be regulated by the city, but Uber and Lyft would be.
Correct.
But if Uber and Lyft were violating any traffic regulations or
Yes.
parking regulations, they could be cited, just like any other vehicle or person, right?
Okay.
But we
And the
just-
fines are not higher, or is it even same for,
The violation fines are the same. It's based on the violation, not the person
Mm-hmm.
who it's issued to, so.
how would we complain to the CPUC if we see, I mean, no, I guess it would be calling the police department, right? If they violate
If you see a
it.
parking or a traffic violation, absolutely, you can call us, and if we have an officer in the area, we'll send them out right away.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
Are you with the police
I
department?
am.
Okay.
Yes.
She's a community service officer and handles a lot of our other permitting and regulations, including alarms, block parties, and
Solicitation,
solicitation,
helicopter lists.
massage, a lot of things. So very, very busy person.
It's fun.
Thank you.
Can I dive in?
Liz, yes, Liz, go ahead.
So some of the other things that have come to mind are, there's a taxi stand. Yeah, thanks. Have a hard time remembering that. Taxis have a place where you can, I mean, if you want a cab, you know where to go, where this cab stand, or usually in front of a hotel.
Hotel, yes.
Right, would be pretty common. So Uber and Lyft don't use those, as I recall.
They don't.
So I don't know if that's illegal or if it just doesn't happen, but I noticed they don't use them.
Yes, it would be illegal, but like our taxi stand that we have on Linton Plaza is only available for very limited hours, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday evening. And I'm not exact on the hours, but I think it's like 8 to 2. And if anyone else is in there, we will tow. And we do. We tow every month. Cars that have parked there, they went to dinner, didn't pay attention to the sign. But no,
Wow,
Lyft
that
drivers
must-
could not.
Must surprise the people when they come out, doesn't it? Wow. So, because these are really quite different in a way. What you're saying is here's a new way to call a cab, essentially. And you're right, many people still call a cab. They don't go on an app, especially because there isn't an app yet. But it's interesting because they are such different services. And whereas Lyft and Uber both use surge and things like that to control the fare, do you think cabs are going to do the same? Because they pretty much have a set price.
Correct.
They do. I think there will be some surge pricing
Never higher than our.
than what their meter
rates
rate
are.
is, yes. So it's
Oh, that's
actually a little bit
different.
more
Okay.
competitive.
That's quite a bit different.
It is different.
Yeah.
If I could hop in, so that means they can go, sorry to interrupt, I just want to ask, that means they could go below their standard, but unlike Uber or Lyft, they couldn't go above their standard?
Correct.
Forgive me for jumping in, go ahead.
No, but that's interesting because I think there's some distinct differences. And I'm delighted that there'll be an app, but I think lots of people that use cabs are either older or have handicaps or they're just in town and they walk out of their hotel and there's a cab. So I think this is good and I'm delighted, but I wouldn't want people to think they're not one and the same. Whereas Lyft and Uber are fairly close, including Lyft line and so forth.
Correct.
This is quite different.
Yes,
Especially if they can't carry more than one passenger.
Correct.
Now,
Well, they can
surely
carry more than one passenger.
Yes,
It's,
just one fare.
They wouldn't do the ride share where
Yeah,
they
yes,
stop,
right.
pick up one person,
Correct.
pick up the next person, and yes, essentially a
Right,
carpool.
right, yeah.
But I
So
just,
they would, if two people walk out at the same time and realize they're going to the same place, they
Sure.
could share the cab, of
Sure.
course, right?
Yes.
And split the fare.
But I just wanted to clarify that the app actually does exist and it's being utilized. It's just, it isn't permitted in our city yet, so they haven't been able
Yes,
to use it.
I'm sorry, I
Okay.
misspoke on that it doesn't exist. So after tonight and after it goes back through council, it will exist?
Yes.
And how will we publicize that if we are going to?
Well, I think the cab companies will certainly publicize
Sure,
it, and,
yeah.
that, because it's to their
It's-
benefit,
yes.
absolutely, to let people know that,
But there must be times when you are in a situation where you think somebody needs a cab or needs a lift, or how do you decide?
I think our officers in the field do that
Yes.
quite a bit, particularly on Friday and Saturday
Right.
nights, and they'll
Do them a
either hail a
favor.
cab here, or they'll have somebody, here, use your app and get, and this could be
Yeah.
one additional tool that we could
'Cause you're
tell
not gonna
people
drive
about in the
long
field.
ways, yes.
Exactly.
Okay, no, that's very helpful, and I'm glad to see this, because I've thought about this for quite a while. One other thing, San Jose's rule, as I recall, is once you get in a cab in San Jose at the airport, there's a flat rate. I think it's $15, and it doesn't matter where you go.
I'm not familiar with that,
It
I'm
is,
sorry.
I mean, that's,
Yeah, that's-
I know
no,
that's
that's-
true, yes. But I don't imagine we'll do anything that's like that.
I don't think we've thought about regulating the fares in that manner right now, certainly.
Yeah, they did it in San Jose because people frequently were at the airport and went 5 minutes away, and it was.
Charge $50
it was
or
a very
something.
very low price. Okay, thanks. Good.
Well, thank you.
Good to know what's going to happen. Do you want
All
to make a
right.
motion? Or you got some questions?
I was going to make the motion, but if you want to, go ahead.
I would move the recommendation, which is, it says that we adopt the proposed revised municipal code 4.42 in order to allow cab service to be prearranged through a mobile device application and an internet online service.
Second.
I don't have anything further to say. I'm glad it's going to happen.
I'll just say good work.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments on the motion? Very good. All in favor of the motion? Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you so much.
Thanks, have a good night.
You too. Okay, moving on to our second item of the evening. Discussion recommendations for 2018 City Council priority setting process. And I'll just preempt something that I'm sure staff will point out as well, but that we are discussing the process, not the priorities this evening.
That's right. And actually, Jim Keane, City Manager Jim Keane, wanted to be here for this. I'm not sure, he might have thought the meeting started at 7.
Do you want to ping him? We could,
I just did.
I'd be okay with maybe a little staff presentation while we're waiting for Jim, or we
Right.
could even reorder and do 3 while we're looking for him. If he wants to be present for this, I think we should give him the opportunity if he's in the building.
Number 3, I'm waiting for Terrence
Okay.
from the attorney's office. I pinged him as well. I don't know if both think we started at 7, but
All right, let's take 5.
we can do that.
Let's take 5.
Take 5 minutes, and then I can
And
text him as
If
well.
they show up, then we'll start as soon as they want to, either of them gets here.
Seriously, do you want to cover future agendas?
Okay, well, sure, yeah,
Mind getting out of here early?
can we do that?
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said, Tom.
I said, should we do future agendas, just get out of the way?
Sure.
Are we okay to change
Why
the order
not?
around a little bit?
Yeah, we certainly can. So does everybody have the copy of the future agenda items.
At
There-
places, looks like this.
Yeah, that's the one.
Do you have extra ones?
I do.
Thank you.
Do you find yours that says?
Well, I've got a lot of other stuff here. I'm not sure I got that one in there. Yep, thanks.
So it's unlikely we'll have a meeting in January just because of the selection of the committees and so on. So I think the first meeting is going to be in February 13th. We have these items here as tentative or potential items, and on the back page we have a variety of audit reports that Harriet would like to bring forward. I know that the community health needs assessment from the fire department is ready to go, according to the chief. And so is the library collaboration with the school district, according to Monique.
And the recommendations from the Human Relations Commission, item 3, that's going to need to go to council first.
Goes to council first before.
I don't know if we're going to have it, I don't know if that's on the council's agenda in January to get
It's
to.
on the tentative. I'm not sure where exactly, but it is to go to council first because it's the Human Relations Commission.
Right.
And they advise the full council.
And you said the library collaboration is ready to
Yes, it is. So we could certainly do the community health needs assessment and the library collaboration.
So this group has been the group to hear things about jet noise. It would make sense to put that on the agenda.
Mike?
Tom, can you talk louder? For some reason,
I said,
an odd angle
The
here.
issue about jet noise has come to policy and services several times, so I'm wondering if we should get that on the agenda.
I don't think that's an unreasonable suggestion at all.
Okay. Put that on here.
I'm just curious.
It has come several times, though, correct?
Yeah, we funded hiring a consultant
Yeah.
before the
Yeah.
the hearings. Why did the Bryan Street Garage Fund change its name? Curious.
The teens wanted it to change.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty
I
cool,
think it's a cool
actually.
name,
Yes,
yeah.
so did I. But they didn't remember the old teen center on Bryan Street, and so they requested it.
Let me get some new teens, switch it back.
And there's likely to be, and I'll have to defer to Harriet on this, the city auditor, but she did say that there was some timeliness to some things coming in February, as I recall. So there'll probably be 1 or 2 audit items.
Okay.
And that's probably enough right there.
Okay. Looks pretty good. Any other questions or comments about future agendas?
Just these audit items, are a lot of these really short, the status updates, or are they like the items?
I think most of them are status updates.
All right. Well, it looks like we could move on from this one and go to, we're going to change the order of the agenda, which is getting the nod from the city attorney, we can do that. And so we're going to do item number 3, which is discussion and recommendation to council regarding anti-idling ordinance. And then after that, we'll come back to item 2, the discussion and recommendations for 2018 city council priority setting process. So staff, do you want to take it away on number 3?
Sure, thanks, Chair Walbach. I'll do a little introduction here. I'm joined here with Nick Oliver, who's one of our city attorneys and worked on the draft ordinance. By way of background, this came from the council to staff as a colleague's memo. August 28th is when it was before council. And essentially, the colleague's memo made the case that that idling is long-term idling is a problem, and it would be good if we could encourage a change of behavior where people would turn off their engines after 2 to 3 minutes of sitting in one place. And so that was sort of the reason behind the thinking of maybe an ordinance would be appropriate here. So when staff got that direction from council, we reviewed a number of ordinances from around the country that have similar type ordinances, and we began to draft one. And so you have in your packet a draft, and what's in that draft is information and language that we saw in the colleagues' memo from the council, and some of the language we thought was most appropriate and fitting from the other ordinances that we reviewed. In terms of the discussion this evening, of course, councilmembers can ask any question they like, but there are sort of two areas where I think some substantive sort of discussion could be had. One of those is under the section of definitions, and specifically, it's restriction of vehicle idling, actually. It's on packet page 88, 1062. 030.
What page exactly?
It's packet page 88, and it's the second page of the draft ordinance. Section 10.62.030B.
These are the exceptions.
And these are the exceptions. And the approach we took was we included all of the exceptions that we saw in other ordinances. So you got the full suite of exceptions that people have or other cities have. And you may then go through here and say, that one doesn't really seem like an appropriate exception or not. But rather than, trying to think of additional exceptions that we didn't have. So we put them all in here, and I think that's a point of discussion. And then the second one is on the last page, is about enforcement and how do we enforce an ordinance like this. And we drafted a number of potential options, let's just say. I think options 3 and 4, in my view, actually is not likely without additional resources to be able to enforce it. So, as you read in the staff report, I think an ordinance like this is largely more an educational kind of ordinance, that we're trying to educate and make people more aware of the damage they do to the environment by allowing the car to idle for long periods of time. The third thing, I guess, if there's a topic of discussion is an ordinance the right tool for trying to change behavior like this when we can't really enforce it? And I bring it up because we do have ordinances that we then don't enforce, and then we get criticized for not enforcing it, and does this add another one of those? And I have some concern.
One question.
Yeah.
Microphone, please. Liz, you use the mic.
Is there not a state law that addresses trucks idling?
I'm not aware of one.
There is one. It's actually referenced in Section 1 under B of the ordinance that summarizes the current state
Let me find
laws.
it, because I knew it existed, but I didn't see it when I was...
Packet page 87.
Sorry, yeah.
Over 10,000 pounds.
Okay,
It's-
packet page 87, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, there it is.
So I don't know how many, I doubt that there are a lot of trucks that are idling in Palo Alto. I think it's more out on the major highways and so forth. But I thought that was really interesting, and I don't know where that came from to start with, but it's interesting that it exists. The truck law.
Yes, and we've actually seen some cities, I think San Francisco's done this, that have just posted signs referencing those regulations in areas to try to influence behavior.
Any more questions, Liz? I just want to make sure we were finished on the staff presentation. And I didn't want to. Okay. Any other questions, Liz, from you?
Karen
comments or
brought this
motions?
forward, the obvious ones, which is, if you don't have an ordinance, how do you enforce it? And I'd be interested in knowing what you think. I'd rather not start with an ordinance, but I know that one of the areas that's been the most subject to this is at schools, because parents pull in, especially if it's chilly out, and they stay in that circle, if there is one at the school, and they don't turn the car off. They sit in the car and it idles. And I don't know, how do you put signs up if it's not an ordinance? How do you how do you do education without it being punitive?
We do that from, I'm trying to think of a good example where we're trying to encourage people to behave in a certain way, but it's not an ordinance. The one that I can think of, although maybe it's not a good example because I think we created an ordinance around it, is feeding the ducks at the duck pond, which is not good for the ducks, but so sort of, and we put signs up educating people about why that's not
They feed them all the
appropriate.
time, right?
They do it anyway. But you know, it's more of it's an educational campaign, so it could be signage that sort of explains why we don't want people to behave this way. With schools, it's through newsletters and the PTAs asking for their support.
But if we don't have an ordinance, how do we get them to do that?
Well,
Just goodwill?
Yeah, it is goodwill based, but even with an ordinance, I don't know that we don't have the resources that we would be able to enforce it and be ticketing people for
No,
idling.
I
So
totally agree with that.
yeah.
I agree that we don't have those resources and don't want to provide them necessarily.
Right.
I just want to know how could we make this work without, as I said, without something punitive at the end of the line?
Yeah, and it's a fair question. The ordinance does allow for us to fine someone if we create the ordinance, write the ordinance like that. But in reality, we won't be out there doing that. So that's the.
So let's come at it another way.
Okay.
You say don't feed the ducks at the duck pond, and they feed them anyway. Does anyone come along and tell them not to? And say, it has been suggested that you not feed the ducks?
We have made progress on this, by the way. Actually, I should commend the rangers out there at the Baylands, and they do. And that's really what makes a difference, is when you have a conversation with
Somebody
someone.
being around, right.
Yeah, and you say, here's why, and then people say, oh, I understand. And I think with idling, it's the same sort of thing. I don't think people really are thinking about it often, about that it could be damaging the
So you're saying we
environment.
can put some signs up regardless of the fact that we don't have an ordinance?
Sure.
For sure, yeah.
I mean, we could think about, I don't want to say empathetic signs, but signs that would actually explain what it is we're trying to do. And you test drive this, no pun intended, and see what happens. See whether or not we're effective or not. I mean, think of the flip side part of it. Even if we had the resources, cops walking around the turn into the school, writing tickets for parents as they're dropping the kids off. And I'm not exactly sure that that's going to go over well either. I mean, it's going to seem like
Probably
overkill.
not.
It's going to seem like overkill. So,
But does it mean then that in this recommendation tonight, if we want signage, we should include that, I think. We should recommend that you attempt to find ways to include signage in this. And I don't know quite how you're going to do it, but also, you might find that the schools are willing to get involved.
I think we have to try
I
to
mean,
get them
part of
involved.
this is about air pollution, part of it's about public health. And, you know, that's why it's done. As I said, I don't want to be mean and, you know, testy about it, but I think it really does have some merit. So that's what I would like to see. We're not going the ordinance route, let's go at least good signage.
Right.
I would also comment on the school topic. They're regulated even more strictly under state law. So school buses and school-serving buses can only idle for 30 seconds prior to departure. It's a lot stricter than the 5-minute rule for large diesel vehicles. And so signs could also point to that 30-second
We don't have any
rule.
buses, though.
Oh, there's none
We
in
don't
the
have any
city.
school
Okay.
buses.
Yeah.
No. We have school mothers and dads who drive. So, and I just think they probably aren't aware of this.
Yeah. The question I have, and maybe it's a question for you, Nick or Terrence, is there any value in having an ordinance like this where there is not an expectation of enforcement? Or is this is not an appropriate tool or mechanism for that?
Liz, if you're done, I'd like to make some comments.
Dive in.
So I kind of go in the opposite
Tom?
direction. I think, I was one of the memos of one of the colleagues on the memo, as were you, Liz.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily want a lot of signs around town, and I think we have ordinances about smoking, about loitering, about feeding ducks, and it's useful to have the ordinance even if it's not something we're going to enforce all the time. I think we leave those things up to the discretion of our police officers, and they're there in extreme cases, right? So if somebody's smoking every day right in front of City Hall, and it happens over and over and over again, we have something we can do, but I'm sure first thing you do is say, hey, you know, no smoking ordinance. And same thing with duck feeding and these other things. So I think an ordinance is a good idea. I think we should have some form of enforcement, even if we rarely use it, just for kind of extreme conditions. And, you know, I think we should just start with that. I don't necessarily want to put up a bunch of signs all over town that says don't idle. You know, we don't have a lot of, you know, no smoking signs in parks and that kind of stuff. So I'd be careful about, you know, too much permanent signage or that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what my thinking is.
Lydia, do you want to weigh in on this one?
Please. So, I put down some notes, and I was thinking, you know, they did mention schools were one of the areas, right? And you did say that it was highly regulated for the buses and so forth. But then, you know, with the parents hanging out, waiting for the kids to come out or dropping off, I would like to see that you partner with, that we partner with Palo Alto Unified School District. So for their guards that are out there moving cars along, whether it's a parent volunteer or one of the teachers, perhaps they could have, you know, flyers that they give out to the parents if they see them idling. I was reading the Minneapolis law over here, and it's mostly an educational tool versus, you know, really being enforced. And so, you know, even when they see other people idling, they give a ticket, but the ticket is actually a flyer to educate. So I think that might be a way to do it rather than having all the signs all around town. I think we might need some. Now, commercial vehicles are also pretty, they actually have a large part in a lot of the fuel, the emissions, right? So, you know, when we do our construction management agreement, I don't know if I'm saying the right one, conditions of approval, or, you know, whatever those are called, perhaps that's something that we can put in there too, that, you know, there is a need for not idling, and another education point where the developer has to make sure that this is passed along the flyer, or they have the agreement in the approval conditions in order to be able to operate under. So I really don't know if it's a resolution or ordinance we want, but I see over here from Minneapolis, it's actually pretty, they have an ordinance, but they make it clear, you know, that enforcement is going to be difficult. And I think we state that as well, just to let people understand what to expect.
Does it say anything about how successful it's been?
Well, I think they're still going through their pilot program. It's a case study for them. Yeah.
No, we have a bunch. Lydia, do you have any?
I'm done.
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so option 3 in enforcement, it says solely through administrative mechanisms in chapters blah, blah, blah. What are those? On page 90, option 3 and
You mean option 2?
option 3.
So it would be.
Oh, sorry.
It would be the administrative mechanisms in those two portions of the code. I think 1.12 is administrative penalties and citations, and 1.16 is administrative compliance orders.
So again, with this
Put that in English for
Yeah.
seriously. I mean,
would this
a
enable,
layperson, what happens?
would a policeman be able to give a warning, or is it some other person?
There would be the ability to give a warning, and also, I don't have a tremendous amount of familiarity with code enforcement under those sections.
So this would, option 3 involves enforcement by code enforcement and
So not police?
not police.
Yeah, so I guess I would be interested and probably option 4 with police, again, not expecting them to do it except in extreme conditions, but they're the ones that are out dealing with traffic. I don't think I would have the planning department or code enforcement person in our ordinance responsible for idling traffic.
I would agree with that if you're going to pursue the enforcement option.
Okay, I'll just,
But just to clarify, as I read the ordinance, option 4 provides an option. It's an or. It could be through code or police. And it seems like we're going to modify option 4 just to provide for police only.
But at their discretion, right? I mean, that's what most of our ordinances are. They don't.
So
They
they're-
have smoking
yeah,
ordinance, they
right.
issue tickets all the time.
Right. They, yes.
So instead
They
of
do
a-
have discretion.
Instead of a moving violation, it's a non-moving violation.
Yeah, well, we're probably not in that many situations where we've got cops deployed regularly enough where we've got the smoking problem in the first place. I'd venture to say that I do more enforcement on the smoking ordinance than our police department does.
But we do have cops monitoring traffic at schools and catching speeders there, and it'd be a good time for warnings, I guess, for, if again, it looks excessive.
Yeah. Could I make a suggestion?
yes, I was going to jump in with some of my thoughts, but
Oh,
I'll
no,
see
okay, I'll
Andrew.
defer then.
Okay, well, I have kind of mixed feelings about this one. Now, Liz is the president of our air board for the Bay Area, and I know she's very sensitive to the air quality issues, and also is a big advocate. I think all of us have come on board now as advocates of our healthy city, which we just got a nice award for as a city last night. So I definitely see the impetus for this. As far as air quality, I can't remember if today was another Spare the Air Day. We just had
Tomorrow's
4,
another one.
and yes, we're now 5 days in a row, right, of Spare the Air Days. So the air quality issues in general, our contribution to Bay Area air quality and air quality that Palo Alto's put up with, the health issues, I think, explain why I'm willing to kind of consider this and was willing to support this moving along to this point. I am pretty reluctant to say at this point that we should be enforcing it. So I would actually, I think I would probably be inclined to support option number 1 at this time. I think I'm curious to see, if we put it in our code and say, in option 1 is basically says there's no enforcement. That means we would use it for education. We would, police or code enforcement or anybody could go up to anyone else and say, hey, you've been idling your car for 10 minutes there, and Palo Alto has an ordinance against that. And see how many people, flip the bird or ignore them, and that, can inform whether we want to revisit this in the future. But I think that's probably where we should start. So I think I'll actually make that motion, that we adopt the staff recommendation with option 1 on the enforcement.
Actually, Tom has persuaded me, so I think that the more I think about it, the more I think that maybe we need what Lydia has described as the Minneapolis method of you have an ordinance, you don't enforce it. You find other ways to let your drivers know that they're in violation, and certainly passing out information would make a big difference. I'd like to just see people come into the school situation and turn their car off for a change, which is what they don't normally do.
So I take it you're not seconding my motion?
No, that's why I'm saying that Tom was persuaded, and actually, your argument persuaded me even more, Corey, to not do number 1.
So we don't have another second unless anyone else wants to second it?
I'd like to make another motion.
All right.
So
Tom,
again,
go
just to be clear, there's a difference between what I think our ordinance should say and whether we actually enforce it. So I do think we should have an enforcement provision, but I'm not saying that we enforce it all the time. So I would move, I actually, looking, through the ordinance, I think the 10.62.20, the The exception list, I think, is fine as is, even though it's very, very comprehensive. And so I would move that we pass an ordinance and with a modified option 4, which is that it'd be the responsibility of the police department. And in terms of the fine amounts, I'd actually preferred the fine amounts in option 3. I don't know if we can just specify those. So it'd be 100, 150, 200. But again, enforcement is entirely at the discretion of the police force.
I'll second that, but I want you to repeat it if you, thanks, repeat it if you would.
Yeah, so I'm saying we would enforce, basically it'd be option number 4, but I'm scratching the first part that says the director of planning. It would just be by the members of the police department. And the last sentence there with the fine amounts, I'm suggesting the lower amounts that are in option 3, so it'd be 100, 150 and $200 for a third violation.
Did the clerk catch that? Thank you.
So you've really done a sort of a put-together of 3 and 4, correct?
Yeah, kind of.
All right, Tom, do you want to speak to your motion?
No, just again, I agree with you that we're not necessarily enforcing these, but I think it's good to have the ordinance to point to it and not have to come back at some future date and add this kind of thing.
Liz, do you want to speak to your second?
Yeah, because, luckily, we all reserve the right to be persuaded on occasion. And as we talked about it earlier and talked about the education part of it, and we kept trying to find a way to say, this really can be enforced without saying it can be enforced. So I think that's where we are. But also, Corey, when you mentioned that I head up the air board, I thought it would be embarrassing to go to my next meeting and mention that we turned down the idling ordinance that has been widely touted as something that might help with air pollution, especially, we worry a lot about kids and a lot about the fumes and the pollution from the cars or diesel, whatever happens to be around. So for that reason, I think we would look at this as a pilot as well, just as Minneapolis did. Come back again and look at it in a year and see if it's working.
Was that in addition to the motion? To refer to it as a pilot?
Yes. Would you accept that, Tom?
Yes.
City Manager, you had some comments you wanted to add.
So, a couple of comments. In the discussions we had before this meeting, as long as it is legal to have an ordinance that essentially we're saying we're going to either not enforce or have a sort of very low threshold, or a very high threshold for enforcement. I would say I don't really have a problem with that. It does put us in a predicament sometime, though, when a citizen in our community sees a problem and we're not enforcing it, and then being a Palo Alton, they go to the code and they look up the exact section and they tell us, here's the section and why aren't you enforcing it? And we would sort of say, well, we basically have a very low enforcement policy. So, I don't expect that would happen a lot, but you guys will probably definitely get a call sometime about how unresponsive the city staff is, including the city manager. So that's one point. The second thing is, I doubt that without a real educational campaign, we're going to do much behavior change. I would separate the problem, let's call it the problem, the issue into 2 categories. One, we have a whole bunch of things around schools and other activities where there are lots of cars and dropping kids off or whatever it is, and idling. And that's one issue, and that's one where I think signs and or an education program could be more effective. And then we have the folks out on the street maybe doing deliveries or whatever it is, that the truth is probably ultimately we'd be more comfortable citing or something than a mom dropping her kid off at school. I'm just saying practically. And then lastly, I think we should get a little more creative about what we're trying to do here. it's nothing wrong passing ordinance. You guys have heard me say that before, managers reorganize because it's about the only thing they can do, right? Cities pass ordinances because we sort of don't necessarily know how to effectuate something without doing that. But I would suggest two things. I agree. I think the school district needs to get involved on the school issue, partly because there are a whole bunch of kids who sort of have led on this thing. And we all know from actually the anti-smoking program in general, getting kids to really start bringing stuff home and putting it on the refrigerator about smoking is bad for you, mom or dad and stuff, actually does have some impact. And then secondly, maybe what we have are kid tickets that we give out to people. That actually we just have some folks really go up and say, hey, you know, and maybe we have kids even wrote it, hey, please, you know what? We're really concerned about air quality and all of this stuff, and the city wants us to be sure to do this. So you don't even get a real ticket. You just get an embarrassment ticket. You know what I mean? That, oh my God. I'll tell you what, I'd be much more disturbed thinking that kids who really wanted to deal with health and this sort of thing were sort of calling me out in some way than the PD stopping me. I'd get more defensive at first. I go, really? Come on. Don't you guys have some real issues to be dealing with? I mean, that's going to be much more the normal reaction. So, and I just say that from somebody who tries to enforce myself, not enforce, educate people, get your bike off the sidewalk in downtown, don't ride your bike on the sidewalk, don't ride it through the tunnels, all of those sorts of things. I'm not sure I've been able to be very effective at all myself. So I would just suggest we think about that when we get with the city school folks and say, let's turn this back and really amplify what the children were saying about this being a problem.
So I can bring this to the city school committee on Thursday. Same thing. Okay, I can bring this to the city school committee on Thursday.
But I would say, as far as the motion that Tom put forward, I mean, I think we're okay with that. And I definitely think that it's appropriate, it's correct to, one, focus it more to the PD, pull the code enforcement and the planning piece out. I think that's confusing and less effective.
Tom, go ahead, and then I'll share my thoughts.
I mean, and to your first point, somebody looking at the ordinance in this option 4, this is a question for Terrence. I mean, does it make sense to actually call out that enforcement is at the discretion of the officer? So if somebody read the ordinance, they would understand that it's not always enforced? Or does that make it more confusing? And, yeah.
I would submit it probably makes it more confusing, and as I wrestle with us, 2 points. One is, you know, I think we need, another approach may be to suggest, and I'm trying to think through the language about it, not necessarily being kind of the highest enforcement priority, and that might be one way to approach it, then expressly stating that police officers can frankly pick and choose who they want to enforce this against. I think that that's tricky. Right. The other thing that you might consider is mandating that the first offense, so to speak, receives a warning. So that way, going forward, at least you know that there has been some education that's been provided in receiving a warning to begin with. So that way it isn't kind of in the first contact isn't necessarily escalated to some type of monetary sanction.
I would be okay with that.
Yeah.
Change the first one to
One question, though.
warning.
Doesn't an officer always have the opportunity to give a warning?
They do, but given just what kind of what's been discussed here, it just may it may satisfy your interest in providing some kind of education piece in the kind of initial interaction.
Should be the first time should be a warning. But it might.
I mean, there's
But
two
going-
sides, like,
Right.
why did you
Maybe the
enforce it
second.
for me, or why didn't you enforce it for me? And I think just stating the first time's a warning.
Right, there's, at least in the initial interaction, there is some uniformity.
So are you going to make that as an amendment?
I would like to do that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
So-
I think the
so let's
more
clar-
we're discussing it, the better presentation we're giving
So-
back to the council about what we're really looking for.
So let's clarify, was that an amendment then that the first violation would be maximum of 0, the second violation would be a maximum of 100, and the third would be a maximum of 150? Or
Yes, first violation would be a written warning, and then second would be a 100, and third would be 150.
okay. All right, I have a couple more questions and thoughts now responding to this. Actually, a question I meant to ask earlier and forgot. On packet page 89, in the list of, where it does not apply the list of exemptions or exceptions, number 9 is when an engine is operated in accordance with instructions from the vehicle manufacturer for proper operation. Is that basically if somebody's warming up their engine before operating their vehicle?
Only when it would be a vehicle that the manufacturer recommended doing so. So I think it's been discussed in leading up to the colleagues' memo that most modern vehicles, that's no longer the case.
But some, or especially some older ones, that is the case still.
Especially older vehicles, that may be true. I think carbureted vehicles, for the most part, that may be an issue.
Right, right. Okay, so I think that's important as an exemption. So thank you for clarifying that. So I am not going to support this motion. I did try to make a motion earlier that I would have supported. At the risk of getting a little too philosophical, I've got to say I think that the practice of having too many rules so that some of them aren't enforced, some of them people don't even know about, and just living in a society with so many rules that somebody's always violating one of them opens the opportunity, especially when you say you don't enforce them all the time because of resources or discretion. And what that really means is you end up getting into a society where everybody's guilty of breaking some rule, and then it's really up to the government to decide, well, we're going to prosecute you for this one, or we're not. I actually think that is a path to tyranny. And because of that long-held philosophical view, I don't think that that's an appropriate way to govern. And yeah, I think that there's an important objective here, but I don't think this is the right way to go about it. And, you know, the idea that we're talking about potential criminal citation for something that we may or may not enforce, people probably don't know about, it's just something I can't support in this case. And sorry about that, but I can't join you on this one. Maybe after the pilot period's over, we'll revisit it and make it something we can all support. Any other comments on the motion? All right, let's vote on it. All in favor?
I'm sorry, just another clarification on the motion. How long is the pilot period?
A year.
Okay, very well.
All right.
And can I just ask a clarifying question? Because it won't be a unanimous vote, does that mean now it has to take up time on the full council?
Yes.
This topic?
Yes.
Okay.
With what we went through yesterday on the SIP, the Sustainability Implementation Plan, having to do with, water and clean air and going to EVs and all that, I think this is a stepping stone towards going to EVs. One of the things is to kind of ensure that we do have the clean air and, so there needs to be some meat behind it, and I'm torn, I'm always torn because, we have an ordinance and we want to enforce the ordinance. So I'm going to support this because there's that tiered way of penalties. And I think that's a good approach to going to providing the information, education, and then going the next step of saying, hey, you were in violation once. So I think it supports the SIP that we kind of pushed forward last night. So I'm going to support this.
And actually, before we vote, I did actually just want to thank the maker and the seconder of the motion. Even though I'm not going to support it, I do think it is better than was originally proposed, and I think that the amendments you made got me closer to supporting it. So I guess I'm, at this point, opposing with less vehemence. All right. It's the last meeting of the year. Don't you want to drag it out? All right. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Nay. All right, that passes on a And Lydia, you were a yes, correct? You were a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that passes on a 3-1 vote, with myself voting no. All right, thank you. Moving on now to item 2. Coming back to that one, that is discussion recommendations for 2018 City Council priority setting. And thank you to City Attorney staff for all the work on this one.
We do have one speaker for that item.
We do. So, Rob Smith. And if you use the microphone right over here, we'll be able to capture your input. It's the one standing. Oh, the one at the podium right in the corner, right over by the clerk. Oh, sorry, Bob Smith, of course. And you will have 3 minutes.
Do I press this button or is it
No,
on?
You can go right
Great.
ahead.
Name is Bob Smith. I live in Greer Road in Palo Alto, and I'm here to talk about the priorities issue. I'm mostly about a specific issue, but I think it's one that deserves some discussion. When you define priorities, I think you have to decide that some things really aren't priorities anymore, that they have lost their importance. And one that I think has lost its importance is worrying about fiber to the home premises node. We've spent 20 years, 5 or 6 times with major efforts going over this issue. And what we failed to notice is that during that 20 years, the incumbent services have improved constantly what they were doing, to the point that nearly 10 years ago they actually exceeded what we hoped to originally accomplish. Of course, the bar was raised. Now we've been looking for gigabit service, and the whole reason stated, or the main reason stated for having municipal participation is let's have that gigabit service. Well, both of our incumbent providers, Comcast and AT&T, have now stated that they will be offering gigabit service. And I believe, at least as far as I've been able to tell, Comcast is willing to come to my house and install it. The modems, you can buy them at Fry's if you want to buy your own instead of rent it. DOCSIS 3.1 modems. So we are on the verge, really, of having this service that we've talked about for so long, and that we've constantly used as a reason why the city must take taxpayers' money, put it at risk, in order to have the service. Now, many other reasons are cited, but I think the main motivation has been that speed. And by the way, the reason I didn't order it from Comcast is because I have 100 megabit service, which is fully adequate, in my opinion, for most home use, including mine. So you really don't need to go to that gigabit level, and that's the case in most cities that this has been monitored. So I'm suggesting to you that this discussion of fiber be removed as a city priority. We've got plenty of things to do, plenty of places to put $12 to $15 million, which is the estimate for the current new project called Fiber to the Node. And you should take a look at that and see how useless it is without somebody who's willing to come along and be the vendor who actually makes it work. And I don't know who's going to do that with Comcast and AT&T doing the same thing. So give this some thought and consideration, and thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. All right, and let's bring it back to staff.
So,
Wanna give us an
thank you,
introduction?
Chair Wolbach. I can do an introduction here, and then City
Please.
Manager Jim Payne may want to add to it. But Council selects their annual priorities in January, typically at a retreat. And to prepare for setting those priorities, we solicit feedback from the public and feedback from the council in advance. And so you had a At Places memo yesterday, which was the latest information from the public. And you, I'm not sure if you had a chance to look through that. We're still going through it as well, but clearly some themes are coming forward from the public. Emphasis on traffic, no surprise there. Emphasis on housing. And an emphasis on jet noise seems to be a strong theme. There's grade separation comes up, bike regulations, concerns about basements being built certainly came up a couple of times, expanding the shuttle service, code enforcement, actually fiber to the home someone brought up as well, only a couple of people though. So we're still going through that, but traffic, housing, and jet noise seems to be the largest themes there. Then, with respect to the council feedback, we did get that as well, and you saw that in the memo. And this afternoon, I put it in a little bit of a different format, which I think is helpful for you. Just take one there, Corey, and pass it on. And it's the council one there. So what we tried to do here is summarize the different topics that the council members all sort of put forward, and there was a lot of commonality, and we had the council members, as you see here, along the table, and you can see that the top 5 are very, very closely related to what our existing priorities for 2017, with housing being number 1 and finance being number 1. Sort of, they got the same score. Grade separation, rail corridor, transportation and infrastructure getting the most support for priorities for 2018, which is pretty interesting. So the committee's work tonight is really 2 things: is which of sort of the set of priorities should be sort of considered for 2018, the 2018 retreat, if you want to have a retreat, and the process that council will use for the annual retreat, which again is a question, particularly a question if the committee believes that sticking close to the existing priorities is the right path forward, then a full-day retreat on priorities may not be the best use of the council's time. Maybe they want to retreat on another topic or a combination of topics in addition to priorities. So that's where we are with the priority discussion. Jim, did you want to add anything? Or
if I might just, so I think some of the committee members here are going through this policy and services role maybe for the first time. And just to sort of restate how we got here to be doing this in advance of the retreat and coming to policy and services, up until 3 or 4 years ago, we would go to the council retreat and we could spend hours discussing what the priorities would be. And there would be philosophical discussions about what constitutes a priority. And we even had debates about, is that a priority or is that a value? Is that a guiding principle? And all of those sorts of things. So the council basically came up with this concept of saying, well, look, let's try to get earlier input from the council, and let's ask the Policy and Services Committee to try to look at that and sort of pre-organize the priorities so that the council could kind of hit the ground running. So that's what Rob was going through there. Now, in addition, though, the alignment between the council around the priorities right now just sort of doubles down, so to speak, on this preview process. And there's not lots of variability. My own reading of what the direction isn't that the committee has to say these are the 3 priorities that we absolutely say or whatever, as much as how is it that you want to advance to the council how they would discuss the priorities themselves. So you could say, well, we really felt that there were these 3 priorities, but there were 2 others here that may be worth more discussion than some others. You also have more of the outlier issue from the feedback from the public. I mean, we clearly had lots of folks on the airplane noise issue really weighing in. I mean, probably 2/3 of the comments so far were in that arena. And just so you are aware, we will continue to take feedback from the public beyond now, leading up to the council retreat itself. So we'll have an up-to-date sort of feedback to you from what the community is doing and saying. So, I mean, when I look at this, I'm a pattern person, I guess, anyway, but it doesn't look like your task is all that difficult, at least as how you would want to sort of say, how could we structure what it is that that you have. And personally, I don't think you really run the risk of really being in violation of the overall council direction. Priorities are, what is identified as a priority is something really requiring special, significant attention, and generally isn't designed to last for more than a 3-year period, generally. So, again, I think you could safely, within the existing policy, make almost any recommendations that you would want to about what you see here. And, you can, committees before have sometimes sort of gotten creative and mashed up some things and put them together, and, sometimes that's worked for the council.
Can I make just one correction?
Liz, please go ahead.
I had said,
But use your mic.
what I had said was all the same priorities as last year with housing number 1. Can I say another couple of things while we're at it?
You got the mic.
I'm a little concerned because I think that we have kept some of these priorities no more than 3 years. And one of them that I'm very, certainly fond of is the Healthy City, Healthy Communities. But we now have a committee that's ongoing, and I think we have gotten to a lot of those goals. We got 2 awards last night for what we have done in the county, and I'm not sure if we're going to just have 3 priorities that we want to keep that on there. I think at some point we're going to say, we actually made great strides here, and we can take that off for the moment. The same with housing. I think housing probably needs to be more clearly defined, and probably with all of these, it needs more definition. Otherwise, you're including everything you're doing at any given time. So I think that we still can select 3 priorities pretty easily, but I would suggest with that one, we might consider taking that off. And even with budget and finance, I think that's an ongoing issue, and I'm not sure our budget is any more in play right now than it has been before. And maybe somebody wants to comment back on that, but certainly transportation, which means traffic in almost everybody's mind, the infrastructure that we keep hearing about because we don't seem to have enough money for it is really important. And for me, housing has been uppermost for quite some time. So that's where I am on this, and trying to pay attention to no more than 3 priorities and a 3-year time limit, although, Jim, I don't think we've adhered to that recently, have we?
Well, I think generally, yes, you have, but honestly, just my own reading is I don't think you're in danger this year of somehow egregiously, violating the council's directive on 3 years. It's, should generally attempt to be not more than 3 years. But, I would suggest you could think about how to mash things up. I'm not saying this is right, I'm just going to cut to the chase. You could say housing, transportation with special attention to the rail corridor or grade separation, and finance and budget with special attention to infrastructure and pension. And that differentiates it from finance and budget just in an ongoing way. It tries to clarify, are your issues with infrastructure, are they really, what are a whole bunch of new infrastructure projects we need to identify, or is it more, how are we going to fund the ones that we've committed to? And then pension, well, only one person mentioned it, but it really is, it's the other kind of core systems issue we've got with our finance and budget issue.
That's well said. That's good. And I'm sure, I think people have to inherently know that transportation is traffic.
Tom?
Yeah, I was kind of ending up where you were. So first of all, I'd like to say I would like to see us try to get to 3. I think last year we had 5 priorities. It's kind of fudging. I'd really like to see us get the National Citizen Survey data out, even if it's in a raw format, before the retreat. I think the data's collected now. We get it like after the retreat or at the retreat, and it would be much more useful to get it sooner. It's interesting how you group these. Transportation had 6, but mobility had 3, circulation had 3, which is traffic. Traffic mitigation had 2. So I see traffic as getting 14 total. If you combine it with rail, that's 20. So.
Out of 9 council members, amazing.
Yeah, so it's quite high. And I was kind of struggling with whether we should actually combine grade separation with transportation. It feels like they may be separate things that need special attention, but maybe we could lump them together. Certainly, I think finance and budget, we're talking about structural issues with the budget, not just doing a budget. And that's where I think, I'm not sure infrastructure really needs to be a priority on its own. I think the issue is financing of infrastructure. And, rolling pension in there seemed fine. I tried to start the conversation on housing the other night. I think, kind of to Liz's point, housing is too big. I think we need to start to talk about goals for different types of housing and different types of situations and kind of breaking it into categories. So I guess my 3, would be housing, finance, budget, and transportation, and I'm open to lumping those in certain ways. There was, Councilmember Tanaka brings up net promoter scores many times. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it.
Yeah, what is it called?
Net promoter score. I mean, I don't think it needs to be a priority, but it's actually a really interesting technique for measuring issues and satisfaction and progress. So anyways, those are my thoughts.
Lydia, do you want to jump in at this time? Or?
I think I basically have agreed with a lot of what Tom said and how the city manager kind of lumped it together. There's many things that are kind of like bullet points under a main title. So I think when I put down noise, air quality, and preservation of natural resources, there are a couple of groups in our community that's very concerned with noise being, jet noise, right? And of course now there are other noise, what's that called, leaf blowers and so forth, right? And we just went through the air quality having to do with idling. So I don't know if there's a way to include that in one of those as a bullet point, but mainly I do agree with what Tom said and what the city manager had said.
Now, the healthy city, healthy community, Liz meant to have hers included, have that included in hers, but she said she'd be willing to pull it off. I was the only other person who included it. I'd also be willing to pull it off. So I think we should actually scratch that one out. Not to say.
I think for the reasons, though.
Yeah. Well, the only 2 people who proposed it are sitting here, and we both said we can say, it's already
Because
underway.
I think we've
It's
gotten
underway.
there. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things.
And it's
that's
been 3
accomplished.
years.
Yeah, it's been 3 years, and we've made real progress, and it's ongoing, right? It's not that it's dead; it's that it's grown up and it's out of the nest, right? It's off and running. Don't know how many more metaphors I can mix. So I'd actually say we should scratch that one off. Again, just the 2 people who supported it are saying.
We're only 4, and
ditch it.
there are 5 more, so.
But we were the only 2 who had proposed it. It wouldn't be on the list if it weren't for you and me. On some of the others, actually, I kind of want to step back a little bit and focus on the process before I come back to the specifics. There are a few questions I think we should really think about, and I don't think we should necessarily answer them tonight, but I'm open to answering them tonight, and we should definitely encourage council to answer them or affirm whatever suggestion we have. And those questions are, how many priorities should we have? Second question is, how many years should priorities continue? Third is, how much specificity versus breadth should a priority have? And fourthly, should we order the priorities, or should we say they're all equal, right? Because Liz had raised the question of having housing being the number 1 above the others. And I'll say that, my own feeling is that for the number of priorities, I think we should really try to stick to 3. And I think, Tom, you said that as well. I think that's a good guideline. For the number of years, I think we should stick to 3. And for specificity versus breadth, so here's where it kind of interplays with the number of priorities, right? Because if we make a priority very broad, then we can say, oh, we only have 3 priorities, but it's really 15 priorities because we made one all-encompassing. I remember when we did the built environment a couple years ago, and it wasn't a very precise priority. And I think we've gotten more precise over the last couple of years, and I want to encourage that trend. So I would really advocate for being pretty specific. And on the housing one in particular, I'll come back to my thoughts on how we could do that. I think Tom's right to point that out, that we should move forward and iterate on our not just saying housing, or not just saying transportation, not just saying finance. And then as far as whether we should prioritize among the priorities, Liz might convince me. My sense is they should all be equal. That they are our 3 top priorities, and that's good enough. But what do you guys think? Just for now, I'm just kind of curious. Feel free to nod or jump in. But do you think those are the kind of the key questions we should focus on, and kind of as framing questions before we come back to the specifics?
Just a clarity thing.
Yeah.
This indicates that we are setting a process in place. Are we actually putting a process in place, or are we actually making a recommendation?
The idea is to look at, some way to make some recommendations, your sort of look at how to group these. And the process piece, this is on page 43, point number 3, under process. That when the council adopted that was really designed to say, at the retreat, what is the process that you recommend the council as a whole will use to decide the priorities?
Right.
So that's really what it
right.
That's
So
the one part you didn't talk that I thought should be added to your.
Yeah. Yes. The process. So, well, I guess I'd suggest that the process is we should try and add a little more clarity, maybe make a recommendation tonight, and that the process we'd recommend would be, consider our recommendation, and our recommendation might be, do this or that, or pick from these top 6, pick 3 of these 6, or figure out a way to group these, something like that. As far as, how to move forward with some of the specifics, if we are to offer a recommendation, I think maybe we could go with 3 being housing, transportation, finance, and adding specifics under them, not to try and broaden them, but actually to make them more specific. Under housing, I'd focus on supply and affordability. And on transportation, I'm open to ideas about what goes under there, but there's a lot of stuff, mentioned here. I would actually say we could add things like mobility, circulation, which essentially means traffic, right? Mobility, circulation, and safety. But we could put whatever bullet points we want under transportation. And then under finance, I think the city manager had it right. If I heard correctly, the focus on pensions and also on grade separation. Or infrastructure in general. And then the question of grade separation, it's like, is grade separation a transportation issue? Is it an infrastructure issue? Or is it a finance issue? Well, it's all of them. So if we were going to do a 4th, I would just pull grade separation out and say that for this year, that is a major priority for this year coming up. And I'd be open to fudging into a 4th just to say grade separation is its own. So not making a motion yet, curious what colleagues think.
Sounds like a motion. Sounds like a good motion.
Tom?
So I guess I thought about process. I think if we came with something similar to this table, but again, I would lump some of these other transportation ones into the transportation total. I think it would help the rest of the council maybe quickly come to an agreement on the top 3 if we recommend the top 3. in terms of process, I think, this Policy and Services has made recommendations in the past about how we were going to talk about the priorities at the retreat. Kind of similar to where you were going, Corey, but I would say that maybe we should suggest that the retreat would be a discussion of the subpoints for each of these topics rather than defining them here. And I'd really like to see us, if we could, talk about strategy for each priority rather than specific like policies and programs at the retreat. Just really like, how are we going to talk about transportation? And what I mean by that is similar to what we did with the SIP last night. Like, what would be key performance indicators that we're going to try to affect? And what would subcategories under transportation be that would be relevant? And we can do the same thing for housing. We might end up with those bullet points that you threw out. But I think that would be a useful discussion to have with the council, because I think these words mean different things to different people. And so we could all agree on these 3 priorities, but have very different thoughts about what that means. And so if we could have a discussion about, like I said, the strategy and really what are the key measures we're trying to affect.
Could we flip that for a minute? Because one of the things I want to know is looking at staff. Looking at staff and looking at Jim, Rob, Terrence, and so forth. When we give you our priorities, how do you then look at issues in a different manner than you might otherwise? So what do our priorities mean to you? And are you waiting for us to tell you, okay, one of the things we'd like to tackle next is we want to approve 5 affordable housing projects, something like that. So how does this fit together back and forth? How does our priority setting affect you as staff and city manager?
Well, it's probably like enforcing the anti-idling ordinance. I mean,
I'm afraid that might be
it's good to have the priorities, but exactly what we do with, exactly how we use them is to be determined. I mean, so first of all, we think it's important for the council, in your leadership role, to say to the public, to yourselves, and then as a byproduct to the staff, these are the things that we really think are, of really special significance this year. We really want to pay attention to it. And we've made some progress in developing, work plans around that. We definitely give them priority when we're thinking about issues that may come into conflict. We would generally say, well, wait a minute, transportation is a priority to council. If we're going to look at some of these things and we're looking at deploying resources we have, we're definitely going to be influenced by that. So it definitely has value for us. But I do think the points about getting some more specificity as far as subsets or KPIs, as Tom was saying, or I'll throw up another suggestion that Michelle brought up, which I thought was really good this morning when we were talking, or yesterday when we were talking about staff. She said, I found that ways in the past working with groups on priorities that adding a verb in front of the noun activates the intention of the priority in an interesting way, right? So if you're going to say housing, whatever it is, if you're going to say build housing, I mean, that means different than explore housing versus plan housing. And I'm not saying that I would know exactly what a verb is, or it could be a phrase even, but that may be in the process when you talk about a way to also help get to the intention, and then we could talk a little bit more about KPIs and things, because I think that would be good. And I think you guys may even come up with some ideas in the beginning, but I would argue that's clearly part of the process you want the whole council to indulge in at the retreat.
Yeah, I think the reason I say KPIs is I really, maybe I'm being optimistic, but rather than start to get into details about specific programs and people are arguing over those, I feel like we could benefit from a framework around priorities that we could refer to during the year. So I actually really agree with
the direction that I think I've heard you going here. I don't know if you wanted to try a motion, or if you want to, I'm happy to try my hand at one. Well,
Yeah, I'm wondering,
I-
do we actually need a motion? Because
Well, I guess we want to feel
do you want us to say,
accountable to you all between now and when we get to the retreat, that we have, we sort of prepared for the retreat in the appropriate way.
so I think I'll try a motion. I'll have a couple of pieces, and if you guys can help follow along, including staff, and make sure I haven't missed any of the big things that we seem to have consensus on. So the first is to ask staff to bring to the retreat maybe an updated version of this chart, taking into consideration removal of healthy city, healthy community, because the two people who had suggested it are now saying take it off. Possible consolidation of items. So that's the first thing. So this chart, or the information, displayed in this chart, to bring that to council. So that's the first part. Everybody okay with that one? Maybe we should just take them one at a time.
you're talking about continuing to use this?
Yeah, to use this chart, but give staff a chance to maybe improve the chart or consolidate a couple that could be combined, and remove the healthy cities, healthy communities one. So I'll just move that as a first, kind of a first motion. Then there are a couple other things
That
on
would go
that.
to the council as a source document. I mean, you may.
Yeah.
It's just as a reference for us to consider, as a
Yeah,
starting point.
This is the sixth time I've done this, and I'm thinking, did it really have a great deal of impact when we have done it before and struggled and thought about it for hours and had long discussions? I think it's important to have an overall look of what, just what we talked about. I think, Tom, you put it pretty well when you just did the three things. I just don't want us to get down in the, in the muck and we could spend 3 or 4 hours on this easily. And I think, does that actually change the outcome in the end?
Well,
I think that there are going to be some subsequent
So
motions.
should I lay the whole thing out, or should we just do
Sure,
one at a
lay
time?
it all out.
Okay, so the first part is to, as I just described regarding this information that's on this chart that was at places tonight. The second is to encourage the council to pick only 3 priorities, to not extend any past a third year, to have them all have equal importance, and to be specific about goals, but not about policies. And lastly, as a starting point for selection, to consider housing, transportation, finance, and grade separation. And I do know that that's 4. But to consider those as the top priorities from which we might start narrowing down or consolidating.
So I'm concerned about, I know we have this 3-year rule,
Mhm.
but I think housing's probably 2 or 3 years. Transportation's definitely 3. Budget finance might be at 3.
Actually, I think budget finance is only in its second.
I don't know.
Oh, so actually, I would ask.
Infrastructure might
So
be-
here's something else that I would ask staff to bring forward is, we had it at one point, the priorities for the last 3 years.
So, but I would just
So we
say,
could-
I would drop that. I think, again, what we're seeing is a fair amount of agreement on the priorities, so
Yeah.
I would not drop transportation because it's on its,
So transportation has not been 3 years. It's only been 2 years.
okay.
Housing has only been 2 years.
I mean, 2016 kind
That's
of
it.
had a catch-all, right?
That's
Housing,
helpful
mobility.
because we didn't have this before.
Yeah.
And
So,
transportation was 2015.
yeah, I don't think that I don't think any of them would be ruled out if we stuck to the 3-year rule. So,
Well,
and it's and again, I'm just recommending as an encouragement. So, I don't know, is there a second we can make tweaks to it? So we
yeah,
can-
I would just drop that language about 3 years, that's all.
Yeah, I
Because
mean, I think people are going to look at this and say transportation's been every year.
Infrastructure's been every year.
It's in there somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so would you second it with that change?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking for a second so we can move forward.
But I'd also, again, I'd like to add that we get the National Citizen Survey data before the retreat.
Yeah, so also ask staff to try to get the National Citizen Survey data available before the retreat. City Clerk, how are you doing following along with all this? Do you want to read it back to us? Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Okay, the current motion on the floor is to direct staff to bring to the retreat an updated version of the tally sheet with the removal of the Healthy Cities, Healthy Community priority and possible consolidation of items on that list, and encourage council to pick only 3 priorities, to give each priority equal importance and be specific about goals but not about policies, and to consider housing, transportation, finance, and grade separation as a starting point for those priorities, and add that the National Citizen Survey be made available prior to the retreat.
Actually, that's why I'd say, ask staff to endeavor to get the National Citizen Survey data available.
I mean,
Is that good? You're okay with that?
we will do it. And,
Okay.
I mean, Harriet's still the lead on that, and she's out, so, right.
And Tom, would you also be okay with adding, for ask staff to bring to the retreat that list of our priorities for the last several years, so we can have that as a reference?
Sure.
So
Yeah, and then Liz, go ahead.
can I dive in at this
Yeah,
point?
please.
I also want to say one other thing that's off the record totally, but this table
You're
is
actually on-
crazy. I think we need to find a better way than all sitting in a row where I'm doing
Oh,
this all the time.
Oh, this table.
This table.
Oh, I
and
thought you
trying-
meant this one, okay.
No, trying,
Yeah, if we turned it so it was round or sat at a corner, we could see
Yes.
each other.
it's like I've got to come way out here to even see you, Corey. So I want to say, I think you're headed in a fine direction. But I wanted to also take a look at the past, which is always the prologue for the future, of course. But it's very interesting that infrastructure used to be called strategy and funding, then it was called same thing, then it went on in 2015. It's still here and it's still here. Does that mean that infrastructure is just always a part of everything that we do, and that doesn't necessarily have to be a priority? So if you look back, I think now I've heard more about traffic, I guess plain noise, but I think I hear far more about traffic than certainly we did in 2013 or 14.
I think we took infrastructure off the list, really. It's now budget and financing.
Yeah,
And that's
but,
subpoint of that is financing.
right, so I think that in this case, when we look and see that something has been on that long, I think it's just part of our DNA. We just sort of do it. So I think the big things, and say them back once more, the 3 big things we've said.
We actually called out 4. We didn't pick 3 yet.
You did
But we've-
transportation, you did housing,
Finance
you did finance.
and grade
rail.
separation.
Yeah, right.
Right.
That's fine. I'm surprised transportation, though, hasn't been on since 2013. And I'm not sure that that was really about traffic back in 2013. That's a funny combination, transportation, parking, and livability. Do you remember what that was about then?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it was trying to hit I think it was trying to hit the impact that transportation, mostly traffic, right, and parking had on livability.
I think that's when parking was such a huge
And
problem.
parking was big.
And that's why it's lumped into transportation. But the parking issue, I don't think we've solved it totally, but we certainly are in the middle of dealing with it. But I'm fine with that. I think we're going to get feedback from the whole council when we do meet. I won't be surprised if there's some other takes on this.
And I forgot to ask, Tom, do you want to speak to your second? Lydia, any thoughts? And just to look to staff, does that motion seem like something that'll give you good guidance to help the council get prepared for that retreat?
Yeah, I
Or do
think
you have
it's-
or are there any other questions you think we need to answer tonight?
Well, if I could make this suggestion, I think when we present this, when you do, that, we'll be clear about what, how you got to this point, that you would say, for example, that here are the 4 categories, and so housing, transportation, for example, including circulation and mobility, finance with a focus on infrastructure and pension, as an example. You're not wording it that way, that you'd have more detailed discussion on the subsets and grade separations. And so and then you would say, again, go back to this idea of getting more specific about the goals, to what extent you're able to identify KPIs here or want us to do that, so that there's more sense of what are you anticipating or like to see about how we're going to measure progress during the course of the year in these, and that would make this different than other things.
Yeah.
And even this idea of are there verbs to play around with as far as a discussion.
I would suggest, Anthony, that would be useful discussion for the council
That's
rather
right.
than to come with preset lists.
Oh, no, I wasn't
Yeah.
saying that. I was saying that you would say, here's what we're saying, but this would be part of the process that you would invite the council to say, how do we look at this issue of subsets, KPIs, and what's in there?
Right. Yeah, I think that's good, right? You know, I think that having a potential conversation about sub-bullets or on having a verb and action verb to be associated, or to say, you know, as you suggest, you know, by the end of the year or by midpoint through the year, and then at the end of the year, what does success look like, right? Or what does successful progress look like?
Right.
I think those are all great things. I don't think we need to add them to the motion. It sounds like we're all on the same page.
We used to be much wordier than we are now.
Well, I think it'll get
We're trying to
wordier
get
with
sharper.
this other piece
I
when the
think so.
council does it.
Maybe.
Right.
No,
Lydia?
not the goal, not the head.
Lydia?
It has nothing to do with the motion. It's just a question with regards to the infrastructure, right? Is there any way to kind of determine or to provide to council at that moment, what are some of the highest priority, what are in the works, and then what are some that are coming up that needs to be
Yeah.
viewed, just so that we have an idea of what is really something that we have to focus on infrastructure, and how does that impact our budget?
Well, that, we can do that, and as a matter of fact, you know, we haven't set the date for when the retreat's going to be, but we will be coming to council on January 22nd with an update on infrastructure. So the council will have already had a session where we're identifying the plans, the projects, the potential pending projects, and the funding gaps that we have on those projects. So,
Do you think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, I think that will be a good prelude, and then we'll be able to carry over that information to the retreat also.
So it is your expectation that the retreat would be scheduled for some time after that discussion?
I
Okay,
mean, typically it is, yeah.
okay.
Okay, that's.
So can I just restate sort of what Tom was point about, clearly that we would not get into these subsets and these other details. I think that the appealing thing about that is, I mean, obviously, the council as a whole is going to want to chew on this and own it. The council as a whole is pretty much aligned on the high level what the priorities are. So this has the potential to shift the council as a whole into the more meaningful work about, let's just suppose the council said we agree with those 4 headings of priorities. Then the discussion is around, okay, what does that look like and mean? What are KPIs we might want to do? Get more specific about the goal. And we're not spending hours and hours trying to identify just the priorities. We could really get some, and in that case, going back to Liz's question, how helpful are the priorities? If we get more depth at the retreat from what the council's vision or view is of what you want to see accomplished in some way, it doesn't have to be, then it starts to have real value for us, because then we can start to.
All right, any more
Okay.
discussion about this item? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, passed unanimously. Thank you very much. Take a liberty as a chair and just say thanks, everybody, for a good year. There were a couple of scheduling hiccups in the fall, but aside from that, I think we had a pretty effective year on the committee, and I appreciate everybody's contributions.
Is this happy holidays?
This is it.
Happy holidays, and I'll see you in the new year.
So can
Meeting
I give
adjourned.
this to you, Rob? That was actually what, the ones I checked.
Committee members, thank you.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.